So that leads us to the next conversation, this idea that TPLF tends to reiterate that they democratized Ethiopia because they had representatives from all 4 regions in the country. You've got TPLF representing Tigray, the Amhara Democratic Group, the group from Oromo, and then the representatives from the Southern peoples and nationalities. So there's a sort of federal system that seems to be presented as the most democratic system that is based on ethnic representation. Can you talk about why that is not democratic or as democratic as it seems, and why it's more like a unitary system?
Yes, as you said, the front was made of 4 different regions, actually. It was the Tigray, the Amhara, the Oromo, and the southern Ethiopian regions. So after these organizations were, number one, created or supported by TPLF. They were subordinate to TPLF from the very beginning. And then they were not in a position also to challenge TPLF. We have 9 regions: the Somalis, the Afars, the others, Humuz, and all the rest of the people. They have this regional entity, but they were not represented in APRDF, nor in the state itself. All the decisions were made by APRDF. And in fact, that's one big change that you see now in Ethiopia in relation to accommodating these different regions. Now the different regions are part of the executive body and they can decide. But at that time, it is only these 4 parties, and among them, the powerful one is TPLF, and even the most powerful was Meles. So they were deciding whom to assign, whom to appoint, whom to demote, what they should decide. All these things were done by TPLF. There were TPLF cadres everywhere in these regions who controlled those leaders there. So it was not a democratic federal system. And secondly, you cannot assume a federal system without, actually, there is no internal democracy in the organization. Without democracy, you cannot have a federal system. It is unimaginable. So you have seen, they believe in one-party system, and they don't allow any other opposition. And in their belief, anybody who opposes TPLF idea or who disagrees with TPLF is an enemy. They say he's an enemy. Either you are an enemy or you are a friend. There is no middle way. So you have to accept you are a friend. If you don't accept, you are an enemy. This is a motto. And that's what you see even among the people in Tigray. This is how they are.
It's interesting. You know what? I know this might seem like an obvious question, but what were they afraid of? I mean, what was the worst thing that could happen if it was more democratic, if they allowed a little bit more dissent? Is it just simply they cannot risk not being at the top of power? Or, I mean, it just seems like an approach that is ultimately going to be self-destructive, particularly when you're representing a minority group and you're not necessarily even representing that minority group, but you are a minority group in the midst of such a large country. Was there no sense that if we continued down this path, that it would ultimately be self-destructive?
Yes, it happened. That's what happened, actually. It's self-destructive. I mean, they were afraid that they might lose their power. And of course, it is prestigious to be there in that power. They have been exploiting. They have been beneficiaries of all the economic advances or whatever in the country. They control everything. So they don't want to lose that. It is possible to have a fair kind of organization that could accommodate minorities as well. But they were afraid also that as a minority, they would be dominated by the big nationalities. So I think that's one of the fears. They have a lot of intriguing articles in the constitution. But they could have done better than that. They could have, there was a possibility that minorities also could be represented democratically in such a big country. So they failed there also. Now, for example, the constitutional arrangement for the House of Nations, for example, it goes against them. The constitution they drafted goes against them.
Can you explain that a little bit?
The House of Federation, for example, they have some articles, and the representation to the House of Federation. I mean, the idea to have two chambers of parliament is to balance at least the rights of minorities. That's, I think, like the Congress in the United States. But in terms of representation, it is a majority still who could send more representatives to this house. And by doing so, they would be a minority. The idea that this was to guard the rights of minorities didn't work there too. That's a constitution they made.
So the way it's set up, that there are more representatives from the bigger regions like the Amhara region, the Oromo region, right? That are based on, interesting, and there's less from Tigray, but it worked, it seemed, to their favor as long as the representatives from other regions were under their power. But you're saying now that it's a more democratic space and people can actually vote in the direction that they want to, having more people based on population and not having a two-chamber checks and balance situation is actually now working against them.
Exactly. It did. And that's what we saw last week. Of course, when they were at the helm of the power and they can do whatever they want, they were dominant. Everything was going in their favor. But when changes come like this, then it goes against them. They are still minority.
Yeah, you know, this is something that I talk about a lot, which is no matter how much you love, you know, the prime minister or whoever is in government now, ultimately for the future of Ethiopia to be stable, we need to have a checks and balances system. So what they created didn't have that. And when they were at the top of power, it worked out in their favor. But when they got out of power, it's actually working against them. So if you create the laws to only protect you when you're at the top, then eventually your fortune will flip and then you won't have a protection when you're at the bottom, right? So that's something that I think is just really interesting to be able to talk about in this time as we think about what the future of Tigray is. I want to talk a little bit about Meles Zenawi, right? The late prime minister that passed in 2012. You basically called it a one-man show under his reign. And I wanted to talk about how that may relate to when he passed. It seemed like there was like a lid on Ethiopia that just exploded. Can you talk about maybe how those two things connected?
Yes, like any regime that has been dictatorial. You know, these dictators, they always bring people to positions where they are loyal to them, absolutely loyal to them. It's not their quality, their ability or something like that. It is how loyal they are to them. They don't want to show themselves being excelled by their minors, I would say. So
Like, you don't want to be like, there's a quote that says something about like, if you want to be successful, you can't be the smartest person in the room. So it's the
yeah,
opposite. They had to be, or he had to
yeah,
be
they are the
the
smartest all the time on the top. The rest must be stupid dumb. So that's how they go. And when they are out of the scene, then the whole thing collapses. That's what happened to TPLF also. That was expected. I mean, we have been saying that many times. That's what is going to happen. Of course, what we were afraid was there would be chaotic, probably military takeover or something like that. It didn't happen. It didn't happen because there was conflict among the different groups in TPLF themselves. The army against the security, against the different groupings. So it didn't work that way. So they refrained from attempting any coup.
Can you clarify a
That's
little
why
bit on that? So what's the timeline we're talking about? You think there was a want or a desire among some in the group to do a military coup much earlier than a year ago?
Yeah, sure. Just after when Meles died, they had these intentions, but it was not possible for them. In fact, there was a big divide between the security and the army.
So you're saying there was some desire among some within TPLF to do a military coup prior to a year ago?
Yeah, sure. But they couldn't agree. I mean, there was a big, bitter conflict among themselves internally. The Azeb group and the Subhat group on the other side, all these things. They tried to take it from Tigray. That's what they did now.
Yeah, so what happened a year ago? I mean, just walk us through what the idea was, what the plan was, what they did, what they told the people in preparation for that night of November 4th or morning of November 4th, when some people within TPLF, from what I gather, it's mostly ethnic Tigrayans that attack non-Tigrayan Ethiopian comrades. Can you walk us through what happened there?
Yeah, then, when they came to Tigray, probably at the beginning, they were not sure if the Tigrayan people would accept them as well. But later on, they saw that they could stay in Tigray and mobilize the people. After that, then, as I mentioned earlier, they started mobilizing the Tigrayan people on their national sentiments. They are being victimized by Amharas, victimized by Dr. Abiy, and all these things. They were creating. It was, day and night. That was their propaganda. In their television, radio, they were trying to brainwash the people. They mobilized the people. I remember this tension was worrisome. Abiy has tried to mediate between the Amharas and the Tigrayans leaders. Finally, I remember it was in March 2019, the Amhara State Parliament has openly stated that any conflict with our neighbors, regional neighbors, we have to handle it peacefully by negotiation. They have declared this. And instead, the TPLF was still, it undermined it. They labeled it as this is a joke. This is to distract us from what we are doing now, that is arming our militias, preparing for any attack. And they were beating their war drum in this time too. In the meantime, also there were other mediations sent by Abiy. They rejected all. I remember 3 mediation efforts. They were all rejected. And finally, they were preparing, there were a lot of military parades in big stadiums with cheering crowds, showing their muscle power they have. They repeatedly, they were mobilizing these people, you know, that we are powerful, we are strong, and we can do whatever we want. And finally, as you see it, on November 4th, they attacked the Northern Division, a big division, a well-armed division. They attacked it. They captured some, they killed some also have escaped to Eritrea. And they took all the weaponry that this division had, the best weaponry in Ethiopia. So then they declared, they were proud of it. They have declared themselves that the world does not want to hear. They declared themselves, we have taken a lightning attack on the division and we have controlled it. We have the best armament in this region. That's what they say.
And what was the reality? So at the time, or there was some video at the time that you mentioned that former ex-foreign minister and the late now CU Mesfin had declared that this war is going to start in Tigray and it's going to end in Tigray within 10 days. Can you talk about what that actually did to the people in terms of mobilizing them, and now seeing over a year later what's happening? How misguided was that statement?
Well, they have always been saying that Tigray would be the burying place of our enemies. This was their slogan. And then they have taken that. They were confident that no force would challenge them. At the same time, even they fired rocket towards Eritrea. Well, the Ethiopian government has no other option except to take, to counter it, retaliate it. And it did. But as you see, what happened to the people of Tigray? We have already seen what happened. It was harvest time. They didn't even consider these things to the people. As I said, the people are expendable. And as far as they use them, they can use them. That's all. After the war, it didn't take much time. In 3 weeks' time, it was completed.
In terms of the federal government was able to capture the capital city of the region, Mekelle, and in that sense it was completed, right? But then what happened? They retreated into the mountains, and what was that about, and how did that impact the people?
Yeah, they were defeated. I think Tigrayan people were expecting a better chance of administration, new administration, and but there was a weakness from the government side. It didn't happen. They defeated on the war front, but they failed on the political front. That's what has happened. We have been warning them many times. I mean, there were a lot of weaknesses in the transitional government, or what they call it, Ghidey Zeratsion.
Yeah, the transitional government. So is that political weakness an issue of communicating to media what's going on, what the point is in terms of the outside, or is it was that a failure, an issue of trying to communicate to the people of Tigray what this is about, or is it both?
Number one, the people who were appointed, there were not competent people from the president to down to the lower level. They were not competent. Secondly, they were infiltrated by TPLF immediately. It has been clear now. They said 80% of these people were from TPLF, infiltrated. So every attempt, the government was attempting to, it has tried its best to provide with aid to support the people and to even to reconstruct whatever were distracted during this war. But all these attempts didn't serve its purpose because it was being sabotaged by these infiltrators. They were not approaching the people. They were not defending the administrators that were elected by the people. They were not protecting them. The TPLF was killing them, hijacking them. So people were terrified, more terrified than they had security. So it was a failure of the government and there were a lot of mishandlings as well from the Eritrean force, especially from the Eritrean force. Well, there were some mistreatments from the Amhara special forces as well, but major one was from EPLF, indiscriminate killing of youth, so which forced them to flee and join TPLF.
What do you, so that's an, you know, I would love to get your perspective on Eritrea's involvement. You know, do you see it as a blanket, or where do you see that it might be legitimate for Eritrea to be involved? And I know you're already touching on this. And where do you see that it actually caused some damage and possibly helped mobilize Tigrayans to fight with TPLF?
Well, the EPLF has its own cause to involve in this war because there was this border conflicts. But I would say also it is a legitimate right of the Ethiopian government to seek support from Eritrea. They could have officially and openly sought support from Eritrea because, you know, part of the Northern Division had fled and sought refuge in Eritrea. And with their support that have come back to fight against the TPLF. So I think that cooperation would have been, is also, it was good in terms of finishing the war in a short time without much cost. But afterwards, the way they handled it was wrong. The Eritrean forces looted some of the companies, some of the areas and so on. They indiscriminately killed some people. Of course, I don't think I may attribute it to Eritreans' rape cases. It could be from all sides. Actually, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee has disclosed that it is all sides, including TPLF. And some of the messages or clips that were sent for propaganda sake by TPLF, they could be fabricated, but they mobilize the people, you know. So there was a mistake, I think, by the Ethiopian government, I believe, that it should have declared officially that the Eritreans are invited to Tigray, and they should have also asked them to leave when they felt it was inappropriately doing that things. So I appreciate the support of the Eritreans. In fact, most of the TPLF army was defeated by EPLF, major force.
That's a tricky thing, right? I mean, there's so much nuance in this. I mean, particularly when a war starts, it's just it is guaranteed that it's going to be messy, that there's going to be elements to it that you can understand, and elements that are just unfortunate casualties, which, like you talked about, some of the indiscriminate killings by Eritrean soldiers. I know all parties to the conflict, according to the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, committed some atrocities, which, it just really takes me back to why did we choose war as a way of solving our issues? Like, we knew anyone can just guess, maybe not the specifics, but we can all stop and guess this is going to get ugly. People are on high alert. They've got their own whatever they've been fed about different groups. And so to your point about how the Ethiopian government handled at least the communication around Eritrea's involvement, I know some of this is speculation, but why? Why didn't they just say, yep, this is our partner. We've been attacked. This is an ally that is helping us. It seemed like Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed went and tried to talk to President Isaias about getting Eritrean soldiers out after there was some reports of atrocities. Can you just walk us through some of the handling of Eritrea's involvement by the federal government of Ethiopia?
As you said, first of all, when there is war, we have to expect such kind of damages and human rights abuses, wherever it is. The Americans did that. The British will do that. Anywhere where there is such kind of war, you would see destruction, you would see people killed, you will see women raped. This is almost a rule of war, I think. We have been saying this even before it started. If they do it in Tigray also, the Tigrayans would be victims. That's what the TPLF did. I told you earlier, they don't care. But they would exploit this. In fact, these miseries of these people, they would exploit it just to, this is how your enemies are treating you. They exaggerated it. And they make a public image that this was an ugly type of war. It wasn't. It wasn't like that, actually. That's what they are exactly doing now in Amhara and Afar area. Exactly, even more, worse. That's war. In war, I would expect that things happen. They say they are disciplined, they have disciplined armies. That's not a disciplined army. It's looting. It is gang raping.
It's almost, just psychologically speaking, if you are telling an entity, in this case, Tigrayans, that there's a genocide against you, they want to wipe out your ethnicity, you've got to go kill them before they kill you, which is really what you see on a lot of pro-TPLF outlets like Tigray Media House and Tigray TV. I mean, it is impossible to imagine if that's what you're feeding young people, it doesn't matter, older people, a human. If that's what you're feeding into them, the fear, how can they then go have the capacity to be disciplined when they meet that enemy that you told them is there to wipe them out?
Yes, that's exactly, that's a propaganda of TPLF. And as you have seen, just after attacking the Northern Division, their youth organization in Amhara region, in Walqait area, they killed the Amharas. They killed this, what you call Maikadra massacre. They killed Amharas. And these people also escaped to Sudan, and they cried they are victims of genocide. They are the killers. This is what they did. I mean, they have, of course, I mean, there is a lot of disinformation, and this disinformation has even sent the whole international community into completely, I don't know what I could say, unbelievably and alarming situation that they have taken side immediately to TPLF.
Yeah, the narrative.
They were the culprits. They were the culprits. It turned the other way. Can you imagine?
Yes, I actually can't imagine now that I'm seeing it in my lifetime. I mean, part of the reason, or a large part of the reason why I went more independent and said I have to get in this, is knowing the principles of journalism and having a connection to this country and being able to sparse out some of the data. I just felt really compelled that there had to be someone that's recognized as Western trained in journalism to be able to say, hey, like, we are getting this so wrong. We're getting it so wrong, and it's costing so many lives. Hey, everybody, please support independent journalism based on the truth by going to patreon.com/HermelaTV and becoming a member. Thank you so much for your support.